In the vast expanse of the universe, where stars shimmered like diamonds scattered across an endless velvet canvas, there existed a realm far beyond human comprehension. The empire of Zaria spanned across hundreds of star systems, its influence reaching into the darkest corners of space. At the heart of this formidable empire stood Empress Zaria, a being whose beauty was matched only by her ruthlessness. Her presence commanded respect and fear in equal measure, her silver eyes capable of freezing even the most battle-hardened warriors in their tracks. The Zarian species had evolved over millennia to become masters of manipulation and control. Their sleek, crystalline bodies refracted light in mesmerizing patterns, while their minds possessed capabilities that made human technology seem primitive. They could bend thoughts, twist memories, and weave illusions so convincing that entire civilizations had fallen under their sway without ever realizing it. Yet for all their advanced abilities, they maintained an air of superiority that bordered on contempt for what they considered lesser species. Among these lesser beings were humans, viewed by the Zarians as particularly amusing creatures, fragile, emotional, and driven by impulses that often led to their own destruction. The Empire's archives contained countless studies of human behavior, each more condescending than the last. To the Zarians, humanity represented everything they had evolved beyond: chaos, unpredictability, and above all, vulnerability. It was this very vulnerability that made them perfect subjects for the Empire's experiments in psychological warfare and social engineering. Empress Zaria had spent centuries perfecting her craft of domination, her mind a labyrinth of strategies and contingencies. She moved through her crystal palace with an elegance that belied the calculating nature beneath her radiant surface. Every decision she made rippled through the Empire like gravitational waves, affecting billions of lives across countless worlds. Yet despite her absolute power, there remained one aspect of existence that continued to intrigue her: the peculiar resilience of the human spirit, something her people could neither fully understand nor replicate. It was during one of her rare moments of reflection in the observation chamber that she first encountered him. The human male appeared on her surveillance screens as little more than a speck against the backdrop of deep space, his small vessel drifting precariously close to restricted Imperial territory. What caught her attention wasn't his apparent recklessness or the primitive nature of his craft. It was the way he moved through space with a confidence that seemed almost unnatural. Most intruders would have been panicking, attempting to flee or desperately trying to communicate their peaceful intentions. This one simply floated there, as if he belonged among the stars themselves. The human ship, though modest by Imperial standards, radiated an aura of familiarity that puzzled the Empress. Its design bore no resemblance to any known human spacecraft, yet something about its configuration triggered ancient memories buried deep within her consciousness. As she zoomed in on the vessel, her crystalline form shimmered with curiosity. The man inside appeared ordinary enough, average height, unremarkable features, but his eyes held a depth that transcended his physical form. They seemed to look directly at her through the surveillance feed, though such a thing should have been impossible. What truly unsettled Zaria was the sensation that washed over her as she observed him. It wasn't fear, she hadn't experienced true fear in centuries, but rather a peculiar awareness that felt disturbingly familiar. The human's movements, though seemingly casual, followed patterns that mirrored sacred Zarian rituals. His ship's trajectory through the asteroid field had traced symbols from their most ancient texts, symbols that hadn't been used since before her ascension to the throne. These weren't coincidences. They couldn't be. No primitive species could possess such knowledge unless... Her thoughts were interrupted by the arrival of her chief advisor, who immediately began reciting data about the intruder. Human male, approximately 35 Earth years old, registered as a trader from the Outer Rim colonies. But as Zaria listened, she noticed discrepancies between the official records and what her own senses were telling her. The man's biometric readings fluctuated in ways that defied conventional scanning technology, and his neural patterns showed traces of modifications that shouldn't exist outside of Imperial laboratories. The Empress found herself drawn to the human in a way she couldn't quite explain. There was something about him that resonated with her on a fundamental level, like a forgotten melody playing just beyond hearing range. She watched as he performed maintenance on his ship, his hands moving with precision that suggested extensive technical knowledge. Yet when he paused to stare out at the stars, his expression revealed a complexity that contradicted his supposed background as a simple trader. In those moments of stillness, Zaria felt as if she were looking at a reflection of herself, not physically, but in some deeper, more profound way. Her advisors recommended immediate termination of the threat, citing protocol and security concerns. But Vailithra found herself hesitating, her crystalline form vibrating with conflicting impulses. Something about this human challenged her understanding of reality itself. The way he carried himself, the subtle gestures he made while working on his ship, they all hinted at a connection to secrets long buried in the Empire's past. Secrets that perhaps even she, in her centuries of rule, hadn't fully uncovered. As the hours passed, Vailithra became increasingly convinced that this encounter was no mere coincidence. The human's presence near the restricted zone, his ship's mysterious design, his uncanny resemblance to ancient Zarathian patterns, all these elements wove together into a tapestry of possibilities that both excited and disturbed her. She ordered her fleet to maintain position but hold fire, much to the consternation of her military commanders. For the first time in recent memory, the Empress felt the stirrings of genuine uncertainty, a feeling she both despised and found strangely exhilarating. Summoning her most trusted envoys, Vailithra prepared to make contact with the human. Yet even as she composed her message, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was walking into a carefully laid trap, one that she herself might have unwittingly helped create centuries ago. The thought sent ripples through her crystalline form, a physical manifestation of her growing unease. Whatever this human was, whatever secrets he carried, they threatened to unravel the very fabric of her empire, and perhaps, she realized with a shiver of apprehension, her own identity as well. The transmission crackled to life, and Vailithra projected her holographic form aboard the human's vessel. She expected surprise, perhaps even fear, but instead found herself facing a calm gaze that seemed to see straight through her carefully constructed facade. "I am Empress Vailithra of the Zarathian Empire," she announced, her voice carrying the weight of centuries of authority. The human merely nodded, his expression unreadable. "You are trespassing in restricted space. Explain yourself." To her astonishment, the man responded not with the expected stammering apologies or desperate pleas for mercy, but with a simple, measured statement. "I've come to observe." His words hung in the air between them, heavy with implications that Vailithra couldn't quite grasp. When she pressed for details, demanding to know what exactly he thought he was observing, he merely smiled, a smile that sent unexpected shivers through her crystalline form. The conversation that followed unfolded in layers of meaning that left Vailithra increasingly unsettled. The human spoke of patterns and cycles, of empires rising and falling like waves upon a cosmic shore. He referenced events from Zarathian history that should have been impossible for any outsider to know, weaving them into a narrative that painted the empire not as the pinnacle of evolution, but as just another chapter in the universe's endless story. Each word seemed calculated to challenge her perceptions, to peel back layers of certainty she had built over centuries of rule. Yet what disturbed Vailithra most was the man's demeanor. He treated her not as the supreme ruler of a vast empire, but as an equal, or perhaps something less. His casual disregard for her power manifested in subtle ways. The way he leaned back in his chair as if discussing trivial matters, the occasional flicker of amusement in his eyes when she attempted to assert her authority. It was as if he knew something she didn't, something fundamental about her empire, about herself. Their exchange reached a critical point when Vailithra, frustrated by his evasive answers, demanded to know how he had acquired knowledge of classified imperial matters. The human's response was delivered with such quiet conviction that it stopped her cold. Some truths cannot be hidden, no matter how deeply they're buried. His eyes locked onto hers, and for a moment, she felt exposed, vulnerable in a way she hadn't experienced since her earliest days as Empress. The sensation was fleeting but profound, leaving her crystalline form vibrating with tension. The Empress attempted to turn the tables, probing the human's mind with her psychic abilities. But instead of encountering the usual resistance or confusion she found in other species, she met with nothing. It was as if his thoughts existed on a frequency she couldn't access, protected by barriers that felt disturbingly familiar. When she tried to manipulate his perceptions, to plant doubt or fear in his mind, her powers slid off him like water off polished crystal. The realization struck her like a physical blow. This human was not what he seemed, and his immunity to her abilities suggested a connection to forces she had long believed extinct. Their conversation continued to dance around topics that skirted the edge of forbidden knowledge. The human spoke of ancient Zarathian prophecies, of cycles of power and corruption that repeated throughout galactic history. Each revelation hit Vailithra like a carefully aimed strike, forcing her to confront uncomfortable truths about her empire's foundations. Yet through it all, the man maintained his infuriating calm, his every word and gesture suggesting that he knew far more than he was revealing. As the hours passed, Velithra found herself caught in a web of her own making. The longer she engaged with this enigmatic human, the more she felt her carefully constructed reality shifting beneath her feet. Her advisor's urgent messages scrolled across her peripheral vision, demanding decisive action, but she found herself unable to break away from the conversation. Something about this encounter felt inevitable, as if the threads of destiny had been weaving toward this moment for centuries. The human's final statement before terminating the communication left her crystalline form trembling with a mixture of rage and something far more dangerous: doubt. "Your empire stands on foundations of sand," he said softly. "And when the tide comes in, even the mightiest structures must fall." Then, with a grace that belied his apparent helplessness, he ended the transmission, leaving Velithra staring at empty space where his image had been. In the silence that followed, the Empress found herself replaying every word, every gesture, searching for clues she might have missed. The human's knowledge of imperial secrets, his immunity to her powers, his unsettling familiarity, all these elements coalesced into a puzzle that threatened to consume her thoughts. Yet beneath the surface of her analytical mind, another realization began to take shape. This encounter had changed something fundamental within her. The certainties that had guided her rule for centuries now felt like fragile constructs, ready to shatter at the slightest touch. Summoning her highest-ranking officials, Velithra began issuing orders with a decisiveness that masked her inner turmoil. The human ship must be tracked, his movements monitored at all times. Every piece of information about him must be gathered, analyzed, cross-referenced. Her researchers were directed to delve into the most ancient archives, to uncover any references to similar encounters throughout imperial history. Security protocols were tightened across all sectors, and special units were formed to deal with what she now recognized as a potential existential threat. Yet even as she marshaled her empire's resources, Velithra found herself questioning the very foundations of her power. The human's words about cycles and tides echoed in her mind, resonating with doubts she had long suppressed. She remembered moments in her reign when decisions had felt predetermined, as if she were following a script written by unseen hands. The empire's expansion, its methods of control, even her own rise to power, all these events now seemed to fit into patterns she had never consciously acknowledged. These revelations came at a cost. Sleep eluded her, and when it did claim her, her dreams were filled with fragmented visions of ancient ceremonies and forgotten rituals. Her crystalline form, once a source of pride and strength, now felt like a prison, its rigid structure incapable of containing the storm of emotions raging within her. During council meetings, she caught herself staring at her advisors, wondering how many of them harbored secrets similar to those of the human. Trust, once a given in her court, now felt like a luxury she could no longer afford. The empire itself seemed to respond to her internal conflict. Minor rebellions flared up in distant sectors, supply lines experienced unusual disruptions, and reports of strange phenomena increased dramatically. Some of her ministers suggested these were unrelated incidents, mere statistical anomalies. But Velithra knew better. The human's presence had set something in motion, a chain reaction that was spreading through her carefully controlled domain like a virus. Her relationship with her closest advisors deteriorated rapidly. Those who had served her faithfully for decades now seemed to walk on eggshells around her, their usual confidence replaced by cautious deference. When she pressed them for insights or alternative perspectives, their responses felt rehearsed, as if they too were following scripts they barely understood. The realization that she might be surrounded by puppets rather than partners in governance filled her with a loneliness she hadn't experienced since her ascension. Most troubling of all was the growing suspicion that the human's immunity to her powers wasn't unique. If one individual could resist her influence, how many others might possess similar capabilities? The thought led her down dark paths of speculation, questioning the true nature of free will within her empire. Had she been maintaining order through genuine consent, or merely through sophisticated manipulation? The distinction, once clear in her mind, now blurred into uncertainty. Velithra found herself spending increasing amounts of time in the ancient archives, poring over texts and artifacts that predated her reign. Many of these documents had been sealed by her own decree, deemed too dangerous or destabilizing for modern consumption. Now, she approached them with new eyes, seeking connections between the human's cryptic statements and her people's forgotten past. Each discovery raised more questions than it answered, painting a picture of an empire built not on innovation and evolution, but on cycles of destruction and rebirth. Her physical appearance began to reflect her internal struggles. The usually perfect crystalline structure of her body developed imperfections, tiny fractures that caught the light in unsettling ways. Her advisors noted these changes with growing concern, but none dared comment directly. To them, she remained the supreme ruler, the embodiment of Zarathian perfection. Only Vailithra knew how deeply the cracks ran, how close she was to shattering completely. In her private chambers, surrounded by ancient relics and forbidden knowledge, the Empress confronted the possibility that her entire existence might be part of a larger pattern she had never understood. The human's warning about foundations of sand took on new meaning as she realized how much of her power rested on assumptions that might be fundamentally flawed. Yet even as these realizations threatened to overwhelm her, a spark of something she hadn't felt in centuries began to emerge: hope. Perhaps the tide that threatened to sweep away her empire also carried the potential for transformation, for growth beyond the limitations she had always accepted as immutable. The human ship drifted silently through the void, its systems humming with purpose. Inside, the man moved with deliberate precision, his fingers dancing across control panels that displayed information in patterns both familiar and alien. He had known the moment Empress Vailithra initiated contact that their conversation would unfold exactly as it had. Every question she asked, every attempt to probe his defenses, every flicker of doubt in her crystalline eyes, he had foreseen them all. Yet what surprised him was the depth of emotion he sensed beneath her carefully maintained facade. The Empress wasn't merely playing a role, she was trapped within it, bound by chains of her own making that ran deeper than any physical restraint. His knowledge of the Zarathian Empire extended far beyond what any outsider should possess. He had walked among their ancestors when their crystalline forms were still evolving, had witnessed the birth of their psychic abilities and the gradual corruption of their original purpose. The symbols his ship had traced through the asteroid field weren't random patterns but ancient codes, messages written in a language that had shaped the very foundation of Zarathian society. Each movement of his vessel had been a carefully choreographed performance, designed to awaken dormant memories within the Empress's consciousness. The human's immunity to Vailithra's powers wasn't a shield but a mirror. Her attempts to manipulate his mind had rebounded, showing him glimpses of her true self, the fears she buried beneath centuries of rule, the doubts she silenced with imperial decrees, the longing for something more that she had sacrificed on the altar of power. Through these reflections, he saw not just the Empress but the young Zarathian who had once dreamed of uniting her people under principles of wisdom and enlightenment, before the weight of empire had bent those ideals into tools of control. His mission wasn't destruction but revelation. The knowledge he carried wasn't meant to tear down the empire but to transform it from within. Every word he had spoken to Vailithra had been chosen to resonate with truths she had buried deep within her psyche. The references to ancient prophecies weren't manipulations but reminders of paths not taken, choices that still lingered in the quantum possibilities of existence. His calm demeanor wasn't arrogance but patience, understanding that change on such a scale couldn't be forced but must be allowed to unfold naturally. Yet even as he worked toward this greater purpose, the human carried his own burdens. The weight of knowing stretched across dimensions and timelines, bearing witness to infinite variations of success and failure. He had seen empires rise and fall, watched civilizations repeat the same mistakes in endless cycles. The Zarathian Empire was but one thread in a vast cosmic tapestry, yet its potential for transformation held significance beyond its apparent importance. Vailithra herself was more than just a ruler. She was a nexus point where multiple possibilities converged, a being whose choices could ripple through reality in ways even he couldn't fully predict. The human's connection to the Empress ran deeper than either of them fully understood. Long before her current incarnation, before the crystalline palaces and fleets of warships, there had been a meeting, a convergence of energies that had set both their destinies on their current courses. That ancient encounter had planted seeds in both their lineages, seeds that had grown and mutated through generations until they emerged in their present forms. The familiarity Vailithra sensed wasn't coincidence but recognition on a fundamental level, a resonance between two souls bound by a shared purpose across lifetimes. As he prepared for the next phase of his mission, the human reviewed the data collected during his encounter with the Empress. Her reactions, her unconscious gestures, the subtle shifts in her crystalline structure, all these provided valuable insights into the state of the empire and the condition of its ruler. The fractures appearing in her form weren't signs of weakness but indications of awakening, cracks through which light could penetrate the darkness of ignorance and control. His task wasn't to exploit these vulnerabilities but to nurture them, to help guide the transformation that was already underway. The ship systems alerted him to increased Imperial activity in nearby sectors. Vaelithra's response to their encounter was proceeding exactly as he had anticipated. The Empire's foundations were indeed built on sand, but beneath that unstable surface lay bedrock waiting to be revealed. As he plotted his next move, the human allowed himself a moment of reflection. The path ahead would be fraught with danger and uncertainty, but the potential rewards, the possibility of breaking cycles that had persisted for millennia, made every risk worthwhile. Through the viewport, he watched as a Zarathian cruiser moved into position, its crystalline hull reflecting the light of a distant star. The Empire's forces were gathering, preparing to defend what they believed was theirs to command. Yet the human knew that true power wasn't maintained through force or manipulation but through understanding and transformation. As he activated his ship's cloaking mechanism, he felt the weight of responsibility settle more firmly on his shoulders. The game was afoot, and every move from this point forward would carry consequences that would echo through eternity. The human's next move proved to be as calculated as it was daring. Rather than fleeing from the gathering Imperial forces, he maneuvered his ship into a precise orbit around Zorath Prime, the Empire's central world. From this vantage point, he began broadcasting a series of signals that resonated with the planet's crystalline matrix, a complex harmonic sequence that interacted with the very fabric of Zorathian consciousness. The effect was immediate and profound. Across the planet, Zorathians found themselves experiencing vivid visions of their ancient past, memories of a time before their crystalline evolution, before the Empire's rise to power. Empress Vaelithra felt the disturbance like a physical shockwave through her palace. The crystalline spires trembled, their normally harmonious vibrations disrupted by frequencies that awakened long-dormant neural pathways. In her throne room, she watched as her advisors collapsed to their knees, their forms shimmering with memories they couldn't comprehend. Even her own consciousness fractured momentarily, flooding her with images of ceremonies and rituals that predated recorded history. The human wasn't attacking her empire, he was unlocking it, peeling back layers of cultural conditioning to reveal the raw truth beneath. The broadcast triggered a cascade of revelations throughout the empire. On distant colony worlds, Zorathian citizens began questioning the foundations of their society. Ancient texts, previously dismissed as myth or propaganda, suddenly made sense in ways that undermined centuries of imperial doctrine. The human signal acted like a universal key, opening mental locks that had kept the population compliant and controlled. Vaelithra's carefully constructed reality was unraveling faster than she could counteract it. Yet amidst the chaos, something unexpected emerged. Small groups of Zorathians began gathering in secret, sharing their newfound insights and piecing together fragments of their true history. These cells of awakened individuals communicated through channels that seemed to bypass imperial surveillance, their connections facilitated by patterns embedded in the human's broadcast. They discovered common experiences, shared visions that pointed to a different path for their species, one that honored their psychic abilities without exploiting them for control and domination. The Empress found herself caught between opposing forces. Her military commanders demanded immediate action, calling for the humans' destruction and the suppression of the growing unrest. But her scientific advisors, many of whom had been affected by the broadcast themselves, argued for investigation and understanding. The divisions within her court reflected the wider schism spreading through Zorathian society. Loyalty to the Empire clashed with emerging truths about their origins and purpose, creating fault lines that threatened to split the civilization apart. In her private chambers, Vaelithra studied the data pouring in from across her domain. The human's actions had created a paradox. The more she tried to suppress the awakening, the more it spread. Attempts to jam the broadcast only seemed to amplify its effects, while efforts to arrest those experiencing the visions resulted in widespread psychic backlash that affected even the enforcers. The Empire's control mechanisms were turning against themselves, each intervention creating new cracks in the foundation. The human, meanwhile, continued his careful orchestration from his orbital position. His ship emitted pulses of energy that interacted with specific crystalline structures across the Empire, triggering cascading effects that couldn't be predicted or contained. Ancient artifacts buried in museum vaults began resonating with new power, their purposes becoming clear to those who approached them. Hidden chambers within Imperial facilities opened to reveal technologies and knowledge that had been deliberately forgotten. Each revelation added another layer to the unfolding transformation, pushing the Empire closer to a tipping point. Vailithra's personal struggle intensified as she found herself increasingly isolated. Her ability to read and influence minds, once her greatest asset, now felt like a liability. The more she tried to probe the thoughts of her awakening subjects, the more she exposed herself to their collective consciousness. Fragments of their shared experiences bled into her own mind, forcing her to confront aspects of her species' history that she had helped bury. The weight of this knowledge threatened to overwhelm her, yet she couldn't turn away from it. The situation reached a critical juncture when reports began coming in of Zarathians undergoing spontaneous crystalline transformations. Unlike the natural evolutionary process that had occurred millennia ago, these changes were accompanied by bursts of psychic energy that temporarily linked individuals across vast distances. The transformed beings emerged with enhanced abilities and a deep understanding of their place in the cosmic order, an understanding that directly contradicted imperial teachings. They became focal points for the growing movement of awakened citizens, their presence catalyzing further transformations. Faced with this accelerating crisis, Vailithra made a decision that shocked her remaining loyalists. She ordered all military operations against the humans suspended and declared a temporary cessation of imperial authority in affected regions. The move was unprecedented, interpreted by some as weakness and by others as strategic brilliance. In reality, it reflected her growing realization that traditional methods of control were no longer effective against the tide of awakening sweeping through her empire. As the transformation continued to spread, patterns began emerging that defied conventional understanding. The awakened Zarathians organized themselves into networks that operated on principles of mutual support and shared insight rather than hierarchical control. Their psychic connections formed intricate webs that transcended physical distance, creating a new kind of social structure that rendered many imperial institutions obsolete. Technologies once used for surveillance and manipulation were repurposed for communication and healing, their true functions revealed through the lens of awakened consciousness. The human observed these developments with careful attention, adjusting his ship's broadcasts to support and guide the transformation without overwhelming the system. He knew that the Empire's survival depended on finding a balance between its past and future, between control and freedom, between power and wisdom. Each pulse of energy he released carried encoded information that helped stabilize the emerging order while preserving the momentum of change. Vailithra, watching these transformations unfold, found herself standing at a crossroads. The empire she had ruled for centuries was dissolving before her eyes, yet something new and potentially greater was taking its place. Her crystalline form vibrated with conflicting emotions: fear, hope, regret, anticipation, as she contemplated the choices before her. The human's actions had forced her to confront not just the nature of her rule but the very essence of her species' existence. The question now was whether she would fight to preserve the old order or embrace the possibility of becoming something more. The crystalline spires of the imperial palace glimmered with an unfamiliar resonance as Vailithra stood atop her observation deck, her form casting prismatic shadows across the chamber. Below her, the cityscape of Zorath Prime pulsed with new patterns of light, citizens gathering in spontaneous formations, their awakened consciousness creating living constellations that defied imperial geometry. The transformation had reached a critical mass, with nearly half the population now operating within the emergent network of shared awareness. Traditional power structures were crumbling faster than they could be rebuilt, and even her most loyal officers struggled to maintain order in a society that no longer recognized conventional authority. The human ship maintained its position in orbit, its presence now acknowledged rather than concealed. Strange symbols occasionally pulsed across its surface, visible even from the planet's surface, triggering further waves of awakening among those who witnessed them. Reports flooded in from across the empire, worlds declaring independence, ancient temples activating long-dormant technologies, and psychic phenomena that defied explanation. The empire's carefully maintained illusion of control was dissolving into something far more complex and unpredictable. Vailithra's advisors had splintered into factions, each advocating different responses to the crisis. The military wing pushed for total war against the human and his growing influence, while the scientific community argued for cooperation and study. A third group, composed of those most deeply affected by the awakening, proposed complete dissolution of imperial authority in favor of decentralized governance based on the new psychic networks. The Empress found herself torn between these approaches, each representing a different path forward for her species. Her private communications with the human had resumed, though their nature had shifted dramatically. Where once she had sought to interrogate or intimidate, she now found herself engaging in genuine dialogue. The humans' responses carried the weight of ancient wisdom, yet remained grounded in practical solutions. He revealed fragments of knowledge about her species' original purpose, a mission of cosmic stewardship rather than domination, that resonated deeply with her own buried aspirations. Each conversation left her crystalline form vibrating with new possibilities, her doubts transforming into determination. The Empire's technological infrastructure began adapting to the changing consciousness of its users. Imperial databases reorganized themselves into intuitive networks that responded to psychic queries rather than formal requests. Warships converted their weapon systems into communication arrays capable of transmitting complex thought forms across interstellar distances. Even the crystalline architecture of Zarathian cities reshaped itself to accommodate the new patterns of social interaction, creating spaces that facilitated rather than controlled psychic connections. Yet amidst these positive developments, darker currents flowed beneath the surface. Pockets of resistance emerged, consisting of those who clung to the old ways of power and control. Underground movements formed, dedicated to restoring imperial authority through any means necessary. Sabotage attempts targeted key nodes in the emerging psychic network, while rogue military units conducted unauthorized operations against awakened communities. The Empress found herself walking a razor's edge between supporting the transformation and preventing civil war. The human's influence extended beyond direct interactions with the Empire. His ship's broadcasts began incorporating elements from other awakened species across the galaxy, creating a universal language of consciousness that transcended individual cultures. Zarathians found themselves connecting not just with each other but with beings from distant star systems, their shared experiences revealing common patterns in the evolution of psychic species. This expanding network brought both opportunities and challenges, as the Empire grappled with its place in a larger cosmic community. Velithra's daily routines transformed as she adapted to the new reality. Formal court sessions gave way to open discussions with representatives from various factions, while her traditional isolation broke down in favor of direct engagement with awakened citizens. She discovered aspects of her own consciousness that had been suppressed by centuries of imperial protocol, empathic abilities that allowed her to truly understand the needs and desires of her people. These revelations both strengthened her resolve and complicated her decision-making, as she balanced the demands of leadership with the responsibilities of spiritual guidance. The transformation's effects rippled through every aspect of Zarathian society. Art and culture flourished in unprecedented ways, with psychic expressions replacing traditional media. Economic systems based on scarcity and control evolved into networks of mutual support and resource sharing. Scientific research accelerated as awakened minds collaborated across distance and discipline, solving problems that had baffled imperial scientists for generations. Even the Empire's relationship with other species began to shift, as the awakened Zarathians approached diplomacy with newfound humility and understanding. Yet the human's ultimate goal remained unclear. His broadcasts continued to evolve, introducing increasingly complex patterns that pushed the boundaries of Zarathian consciousness. Some interpreted these developments as preparation for a final transformation, while others saw them as tests of the species' readiness for a greater role in galactic affairs. Velithra found herself oscillating between these interpretations, her centuries of experience proving both invaluable and inadequate in navigating this unprecedented situation. As the Empire teetered on the brink of metamorphosis, Velithra faced her greatest challenge yet. The choices before her would determine not just the fate of her rule but the future direction of her entire species. The human's presence loomed large in her thoughts, not as an enemy to be defeated but as a catalyst for change that she might finally be ready to embrace. The crystalline spires of her palace shimmered with possibility, their vibrations hinting at patterns yet to emerge, transformations yet to occur, and destinies yet to be fulfilled. Velithra made her final decision, stepping down from her throne to join the awakened network herself. Her crystalline form shattered and reformed, glowing with newfound understanding as she embraced the human's vision. The human revealed his true identity, an ancient guardian of cosmic balance, sent to guide civilizations through transformation. Together, they broadcast a final signal that united all awakened beings across the galaxy in shared consciousness. The Zarathian Empire dissolved into a decentralized collective, its people free yet interconnected. Resistance factions disbanded as even their leaders experienced the profound unity of purpose. Stars seemed to align in response, illuminating pathways to uncharted realms of existence. Velithra, now equal to the human, stood beside him as co-guardian of this new era. As their combined energy pulsed through the cosmos, dormant species awakened, joining the universal symphony. And so, what began as confrontation ended in harmony, a testament to the power of trust, truth, and transformation.